In this video, I'm going to show you step-by-step how to build an automation in n8n that can access Flux via the fal.ai API. That means you not only have access to image generation models using Flux, you have access to video models like Kling, Luma Labs, Minimax, and more. On top of that, we're using Airtable to run this automation, which will store all of your images and videos that you can create. In this one, we're focusing on Flux image generation, but this definitely has the power to expand and become a generation powerhouse for your content. What's up? My name is Kirk. I teach people how to build automations. And if you check the link down below, you'll find my school community. If you join my community, you'll have access to all of my automations you can download for free. You'll have access to the group to network and grow and build cool automations together. And of course, you'll have access to me. You can always shoot me a message to help you out with your builds or post up in the troubleshooting section. And I'll walk you through how to tackle some of the issues you may be facing building automations. But for now, let's jump into this one. All right, so here I am in my Airtable dashboard. I'm gonna come up here to create a new Airtable base. Click that, click start from scratch, and we can close down some of this default opening stuff. So I'm gonna close down the getting started tab, then delete these 3 default fields that pop up here. I'll click on all of these fields, holding shift on the keyboard, right click on any of them and select delete 3 fields. So that leaves us with a name field in our primary field here, our grid view with the default name called grid view, and our table with the default name called table 1. So I'm gonna start naming this stuff just to keep things organized and in order. I like to name everything right away. So for the name of this base, I'll come up here, click on that, call it Flux Plus Tool. The plus stands for more than Flux. We'll be able to add a bunch of different models via the fal.ai API that we use for this build. So we'll get into that later on. I'm gonna change the icon. Let's just change it to something unique. Then I'll double click on the table name here to rename the table, name it image generation, click save. I'll double click on the primary field name this image ID. We'll just create a running ID to keep track of our images if we need to. Image ID, and this will be, we can click on this field here, drop this down to change the field type, and this field's type will be an auto number field. Click on that. Click save. Now we have these auto numbers automatically generating for our records here. Now, if I click the plus, we can see that the numbered record will continue, but we also have our auto number record right here. So I've got 7 blank new records now. If I go ahead and just delete all my records, I'll hold shift on the keyboard, click on the checkboxes here, right click on one of these records and delete all selected records. Now I have no records in my table here. If I click the plus now, we'll see that record number 1 actually is auto numbered to number 8, and that will continue on. So every time we create a new image, it's going to increase that record number, and we can set this as a unique ID for our images. So in this example, my first image is going to be image ID number 8. So I'll go ahead and delete these 2 records here and keep this one open for testing. We can come up here, click the plus to create a new field. Call this prompt, and this will be a long text field. Click that, click create field, click the plus to create a new field. We'll call this one video orientation. This will be a single select drop down. Click on that. Now we can add some options for our select fields. For this first one, I'll say portrait. The next one, call it landscape. The next one, call it square. So these will be our basic orientations here. You can color code these. I'll go ahead and change the color by clicking on the little colored circle icon here. Portrait, landscape, and square. We'll click create field. Let's click the plus to create a new field. Call this aspect ratio. This will be a formula field. Scroll down, find the formula field type. Now we need to enter in a formula here, so you can just copy what I have here. Now you can pause the video, type that out into this box just like that, or if you're like me, you can take a screenshot of the text here, come into ChatGPT, drop that screenshot in and say, please write this so I can copy. There we go. We've got our formula. You can copy that and paste it back into that field in Airtable. So let's jump back over to Airtable, get that in there just like that. So now you see I've left a section here where we can add different aspect ratios. If you want to add in more aspect ratios than what we have here. For this video, we'll just use these 3, click create field. Now we can test that by coming into the video orientation and selecting an orientation that we set. So I'll choose the portrait and we can see that calculates from that formula we just entered in there, that aspect ratio, 9:16 for the portrait. Cool, let's click the plus to create a new field. We'll call this one Flux Realism Image Size. So I like to use the Flux Realism model. To use this model programmatically, we have to enter in a specific parameter to get these aspect ratios into the Flux Realism model. So this field is going to house that specific parameter. So we'll call this Flux Realism Image Size. This will be another formula field. Scroll down, find the formula field, and you could copy in what I have here. So similar formula to the aspect ratio, it's going to rely on the video orientation setting, and based on that setting, create this parameter for the Flux Realism model that we'll use later on. Go ahead, take a screenshot or type that out. Once that is pasted in, click create field, and we can see that automatically pop up with the correct parameter for the portrait orientation, 9:16, and that is just how that parameter is written out for the Flux Realism model. All right, let's click the plus to create a new field. This will be an attachment field. Let's name it image. Click create field. Click the plus to create a new field. Scroll down. This will be a created time. Click the plus to create a new field. We'll name this record ID and scroll down. This is a formula field. And in the formula field here, just type in REC. That'll bring up this built-in function for the record ID. On the keyboard, finish this off with the closing parenthesis, then click create field. Now there's one more field we need to add to this to actually trigger the automation, but we need to create our n8n workflow to get the information we'll need to create that field. So for now, we are done in Airtable. Let's jump over to n8n. All right, in n8n, I'm in my dashboard here in my saved digital automation diagram workflow project. I'm gonna come up here to create a new workflow. Right away, come up and name the workflow. Call this Flux Plus Tool. I'll click the big plus to create the trigger node. And for the trigger node, anytime you want to find a node, you can type in the search bar here. I'll just type in web. That'll bring up the webhook trigger node here. That sets this one up for now with our test URL. That right there is what we need to create that last field in Airtable. So let's go ahead and do that, then come back over to n8n. I'm going to copy this webhook URL. I can click outside the node or come up to back to canvas. I'll come up, save the workflow, and jump back into Airtable. So we want to create this last field, and I'll drop it down here in between the realism image size and the image field. I'll just resize these a little bit. Right click on this field here, choose insert right, call it generate. This will be a button field. Choose button. I'll name the button generate. I'll choose the style of my button, make it this light blue. We want to open a URL. In the URL formula, type in quotation marks, then paste that webhook URL right there. Now that webhook is all we need to trigger our n8n workflow, but we're going to add some other information to this formula field to actually bring data across and insert it into n8n. So for now, let's click create field. That'll give us our button here, and we can test that out in n8n. Before we jump back over there, let's clean up our view here. I'm going to come up here to this button, hide fields, click on that, and toggle off these formula fields, aspect ratio, flux realism, and record ID. That way we only have the fields that we are working with and that we need to see relative to our workflow. All that information in those fields are still there, we just can't see them. For testing and building out these automations, I always come down to the grid view, create a new grid view, call this all data, click create new view. Now in this all data view, we can see everything that we we just hid in the other view. I'm gonna jump back into my grid view here. I'll jump back into n8n, and here we have our webhook ready to be tested. So I'll come down and click test workflow. That webhook is gonna wait for us to trigger, wait for us to call that URL. Now we can come into Airtable, click our generate button. This will open up a new window that says message workflow has started. We can close out that window, come back into n8n, and we can see this node has turned green. We see one item coming through. That node has triggered via our generate button. Just to double check, anytime you want to see your executions, you can come up to this button right here, check the executions of your workflow. And so you see our first execution right there. Click on that and we'll see all the nodes that triggered during any particular execution. All we have is this first node, and we see that one has triggered, saying succeeded at this time. Cool, so let's go finish off the information we need to pull our data into n8n. So I'll jump back into Airtable and I'll double click on our generate field, our button field. We're gonna add some information to this URL formula. So you can copy what I have just like that. So you're gonna have your webhook in here, and your webhook is gonna be different from my webhook. But after the very last character in that string, you're going to have question mark record ID equals and this function right here. Make sure you get the capital ID equals and the record ID function just like that. Click save, come back into n8n. Now we're in our executions, so we need to tab back over to the editor. Let's come down and test the workflow. Back into Airtable, I'll click generate. This will pop up our temporary window that we'll get rid of later on. Close out that window, back into n8n. And if we double click on this node, we can come back into edit it, but it also show us our output. And we can see in our output here, we've got some things coming through. Scroll all the way down, and in the query, we see our record ID right there. That is our record ID from Airtable of that particular record where we clicked that button. Don't need to know what that means. If you're new to this stuff, just keep following along. You are doing awesome. So now that we have our workflow being triggered and our record ID from Airtable coming through into n8n, we can finish off our chain here. I'm going to click outside the node or click back to canvas. I'll click the plus to create a new node. You can type in the search bar Airtable, click on the Airtable node, and we want to get a record. Now you're going to need to set up a credential here to connect to your Airtable account. So I'm going to click on this drop down here, click create new credential. We want to create an access token, and these are the scopes we'll need to add. So let's see how we can create that access token in Airtable. I'm going to jump back over to Airtable. I'm going to come up to my account settings, come down to the Builder Hub, click on that, come into your personal access tokens here, and you can see the personal access token I have already for n8n. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. Your screen should look like this. I'll click create token. We can set a name for the access token. I'll name it n8n connection, and we want to add a scope. So we can double check back in n8n which scopes we need to add. Data.records read, data.records write, schema.bases read. Let's jump back into the Airtable Builder Hub. Choose data.records read, click add a scope, data.records write, choose add a scope, and schema.bases read. Now we can add a base to this access token. Click that and scroll down to find your base. There it is, Flux plus tool. Click create token, and here is your access token. You want to write this down, keep it safe. This is how you're going to connect your n8n account to your Airtable account. I will delete this token after this video, but you want to write yours down and keep it safe. So I'll copy my new token, click done. Let's jump back into n8n, and you can paste that access token right here. Let's come up to name this connection. I'll just call this my Airtable demo. You can name it whatever you want. I'll click save, and we have our connection set up successfully. I'll close this window. You can see our new credential pops up in here, and now we have access to our Airtable base, and we can choose the base from the list. Select this drop down, find the base. There it is, Flux plus tool. We want to choose a table, select this drop down, image generation table, and the record ID we are getting from our webhook. That is what we wanted to pass through from Airtable. So I can scroll down, find the webhook, what the webhook has sent through, the record ID right here under query. So I'm going to drag this schema over to record ID field and set it in there just like that. Now, if you don't see the schema here, we have a couple different views in n8n node. We can check out the schema, the table view, and the JSON view. You'll be able to pull in all of the JSON from any of these particular views, but using the schema view is something more akin to make.com or something like that, just dragging in those mappings. Just to demonstrate, I'll delete out this mapping here, come into the JSON view, I'll scroll down, I'll find my record ID JSON, and exactly the same, drag that in there just like that. Cool, so just a preference on how you want to view the data coming across. Now we can test this step and see if we can get that record over through Airtable and have some output data. Click on test step. The node has executed successfully, so we've got that data coming through, and we've got our record. Here is the image ID number 8 that we set in our image ID field, the aspect ratio from our aspect ratio field, the flux realism size. So everything is coming through. I'm going to click out of the node. We can see this one has turned green and we've got our data coming through. We can move on to the next node. I'll click the plus to create the next node. This is going to be an HTTP module. Type in HTTP, find the HTTP request. Now this HTTP node is going to make a call to the fal.ai API. So let's jump into fal.ai. You can just search fal.ai, create your account. I'll go ahead and log into my account, log in with GitHub, and now I am in my dashboard. So you will need to throw a couple credits into your account. It doesn't take very much to access these models. Most of them are pay as you go. So now that you have your FAL account created, we can come into API keys. You can see my API keys right here. I'll go ahead and delete this test key so I can generate a new one. What you're gonna do is come up to add key, name your key. I'll name mine n8n demo. Click create key. You can name yours whatever you want. Same thing as before. This is your API key. You're going to want to copy this, keep this safe. I'm going to delete mine after this video, but you'll want to write yours down and keep it safe. I'm going to copy this API key, close this window. I'll come back into Flux. Now that we have that API key right away, let's paste it into this node. First thing is to toggle on send headers, and in the value, let's type in capital KEY space and paste that API key right there. Now we can set up the rest of this node. Just follow along with my settings here. The way I got all of these settings is by reading the documentation in FAL on any particular model. This is the Flux Realism model here, and we can see all the API docs for each of the models you might want to use. I read through this, figured it all out, and found the correct settings. You don't have to do that. You can just copy and paste what I have here. So for the method, choose post. For the URL, paste this right here. Down in the headers under name, type in authorization, toggle on send body. For the body content type, choose raw. For the content type, type in application JSON. And for the body, click on expression. You can click this little expand button and you can paste in this right here. Pause the video, type that out, take a screenshot, get it from ChatGPT. Now again, these are all parameter settings from the API documents. I read through it all, found these settings for the Flux Realism model, and I'm just pasting them from the documents straight into this node here. So that's how I'm finding all of these values. Now I changed some things a little bit so you can change things to your desire as well. For the output format, I chose PNG. You can choose JPEG or something like that. Number of images generated, I'm turning the safety checker off, those kinds of things. You'll have to play around with your own settings, but you must have all of these settings in here for the image generation to work. Now we're not done with this yet. We actually have to link our prompt and our image size. So this is that parameter that we created, that specific Flux Realism image size parameter for. We have to place that in here, and we have to place our prompt. So we could simply type in a prompt here and then type in that image size, something like portrait 16:9. That would actually run. We could manually hard code an image prompt and manually hard code our image size, but we want to get these two things dynamically from Airtable. We want to use Airtable to run this entire thing and store everything in Airtable. So we have our connections here from Airtable coming down our chain. We want to add these things in, these variables in dynamically. So I'm just going to drag this out so we can see a little bit more of our schema here. And coming from our Airtable module, we want to get our Flux realism image size. I'll drag that over in between the quotation marks, drop it down right there. And for the prompt, we can grab our prompt. Now we don't actually have that coming through because we don't actually have a prompt in our prompt field. We have no text in our prompt field. So we're going to have to rerun that through. Typically, when you're building out these automations, you want to fill out all of your fields to get data through. But in this case, I'll give you this example of refreshing your Airtable node with the current data to push down your workflow. So what we're going to do, I'll click out of this node. I'll click save. Let's jump back into Airtable. Let's get out of our builder hub. I'll come back into my base, and in our generation table, in our grid view, I'll add some data to the prompt field here. I'll add a very simple prompt just to get this data pumping through. Let's jump back, come down to test the workflow. This is waiting for our webhook trigger. So we need to come back into Airtable, click generate. This will pop up this window that we'll get rid of in a second. Come back and we can see that data has come down. Let's double click on the HTTP node, scroll down into the body. We can blow up this expression, and in between the quotes here, we can now insert our new prompt field. Drag that in, drop it down, and we have our prompt connected. I'll click out of the expression and we can go ahead and test step. This will actually call fal and generate an image based on that prompt. So this will be our first image generation. Let's test the step, and that will make that call to fal, which will run the Flux model and generate our image. Now we can always check our generations in fal. I'm going to click out of this node, save the workflow, jump back into fal and come into the requests for the model. Now to find this, you can go to your home tab and you should see a list of all the models that you are running. The Flux realism model should pop up. That is the one you just ran. We could come into requests right there and you'll see your latest request pop in just like that. You can preview the image by clicking that play button, and there it is, our beautiful woman prompt coming through and generating that image. Great, let's move on down the automation chain, jump back into n8n. But before we move on, I want to get rid of this annoying window that pops up every time we click our generate button. So I'm going to add a new node in between the webhook and the Airtable module. Hover over this route, click the plus. Let's type in webhook and we'll choose this one, respond to webhook. And in this respond to webhook node, let's choose this option, respond with, drop this down, scroll down, choose text. In the response body, you can type in what I have here. It's a simple script that will actually close that new pop-up window immediately after it opens. So we'll get rid of that. Now, just for good practice, I'll add an option here, choose response code and send that 200 code. Let's click out of the node, come back into the first webhook node, and for the respond option, we'll click in there and choose using respond to webhook node. Now we can click outside the node and that is set up. Great, so anytime you want to rearrange your workflow here, you can click and drag these modules. So we can move on down and add the next node now. Click the plus here to create the next node. Type in wait. We want this wait node and enter in 20 seconds. That's just going to wait for our image to generate, and typically the Flux generation takes just a couple seconds. We just want to make sure that is giving that generation enough time to complete. You might have to play around with that wait time, but 20 seconds in my case is enough. Great, I'm going to click out of this node. We can move down, add the next node. I'll click the plus to create the next node. This will be another HTTP module. Type in HTTP, select the HTTP request. Now this one is making a request to actually get that image back from fal. So we want the get method, and for the URL, click in there, switch it to expression, click on that and copy in this expression right there. Now we'll toggle on send headers, and these are going to be the exact same headers from the previous node. So I'll come in here for the name. To make this easier, I'll click out of this node, double click on the previous HTTP node, copy the name authorization, click out, come back into the new HTTP node, paste that in, do the same thing, come to the previous node and copy my entire API key, come into the new node and paste that value just like that. Great, let's click out of this node. Click the plus to create a new node, type in set or edit, and we want this edit fields node. Now again, we'll have to push data down and actually get that call coming through here. So we'll have to run another execution of this workflow. I'll come up and save it. I'll hit test workflow. I'll come into Airtable and we can test this workflow by hitting generate. Make sure you have a prompt and a video orientation set before hitting generate. I'll click the button. That window has popped up and then immediately closed. Come back into n8n and we can see that our operations are working down the chain. We're now on the wait, which is waiting 20 seconds, just to make sure that image has finished generating in fal.ai. And there we go, we've got it coming all the way through into our edit fields node. Let's double click on the edit fields node and we could add in the fields we want to edit. This is going to be the URL from the HTTP request for the images. I'll drag this schema over here and we can test this step. I'll switch back to the schema view on this side and we can see now everything in this images array is getting condensed just down to our URL. This is what Airtable needs to add to our attachment field and actually view the image in Airtable. Let's click out of this node, click the plus to create a new node. This will be our last one. Airtable, select the Airtable node and we want to update a record. We can choose the same credential here. I'll select my Airtable demo credential. For the resource, we want a record. For the operation, we want to update. Let's choose the base. There's my base, choose the table. There's my table. Now the way we want to update is let's match on ID. We'll set the record ID. So scroll down to the Airtable. Let's get the record ID. We don't need to update these fields that automatically popped in here. Let's delete the prompt. Let's delete video orientation. We do want to update the image. Now for the image, we want to come back to the edit fields node and grab our entire array here. That's simply containing the URL, but that is what Airtable needs. It requires an array in this field. So we'll drag our array in there. We can come up and test the node and we've got our successful output. Let's double check back in Airtable and we should get that image coming through. There it is, our image generation. You are now free to enter in new prompts and generate new images in your grid view just like that. I want to clean up this a little bit and actually add one more view before we end this video. I'll come up here, click this button, select tall. Now you have a better view of the images coming through. If I create a new record here, add a new prompt, set my orientation and click generate, nothing is going to happen, or I should say we will get an error. So there's one more thing we need to do to finish this off. Let's jump back into n8n. I'll click out of the node. I'll come back to the beginning into the webhook trigger node, double click on that, and we want to switch to our production URL here. Click on that, copy that URL, click out of the node, save it, and activate the workflow. Now let's jump back into Airtable. We'll come into our button field, double click on the field, and we'll paste in that new webhook right here before the question mark. Inside of these quotation marks, we'll paste that new webhook just like that. Again, we'll have the full webhook string, then the question mark, then record ID, and that formula just like that. Click save. Now this workflow is active and running and we are properly connected. I won't have to click the test button anymore. I can click this button to generate. We'll see that window pop up and immediately close. Then we'll get our new image in here after about 20 seconds. We'll go ahead and just resize these fields just a little bit while we wait. Clean things up, organize things, and there is our new image, just like that. I'll click into that record and we have a man holding a sword. Pretty neat, pretty simple prompt, pretty simple image, but we've tested a couple things. We've got our landscape view, we've got our full production button operational, and we've got everything working and coming through. Last thing I want to do for this build is come down and create a new view. Let's click the plus to create a gallery view. You can just leave it named gallery, click create new view. And this view simply arranges images in a nicely viewed way. We can see our images, some of the settings down here, and our image ID. If I want to change some of these fields being displayed here, I can come up to customize cards and toggle off some of this information just like that. I'll leave in the prompt. And now we have a nice view of all of our images. All the images in your database will get stored into this view, and you can start to categorize them and sort them based on particular settings you want and create a really nice database of generated images with this automation. There it is. Congratulations on your new Flux tool and Airtable database to store all of your new images. This particular setup is great because you can choose which Flux models you want to use. You'll just have to switch out some of the information in that HTTP request node, or set up your settings in Airtable where you can select different HTTP requests via a selection drop down in Airtable and making a separate request to the file.ai API with different models. You can set up different models like Kling, Luma Labs. So pretty fun build to experiment with and expand upon. As always, if you need help building this thing out or expanding it and adding new features, you can join my School community. I have the link in the description below. You can check out all of my resources. I'll have this workflow available to download for free. I'll have the Airtable database available to download for free. You can grab those and start building upon it right away. I also have a few helpful links down below if you want to get started using any of these tools. You can start on the free plan with Airtable and a free trial with n8n if you check my links below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.